Hey, Firebrand X here with a video on the Ultimate AV Famicom Mods Guide. This will include several featured mods as well as a recap and voltage regulator replacement, and also light gun zapper support restored for controller port 2, as well as Ace's beautiful AV Famicom expansion audio balance restoration. There's a website on that, retrorgb.com has a web page on that. I will link to that in the description, as well as a demo of this particular setup being recorded for audio testing, which sounds fantastic. So I highly recommend checking that out. This video is going to be short and concise. It's going to just be a pictorial guide. It assumes you already know how to solder and desolder. It's not for beginners, of course. But if you don't want to sit through a 2-hour-long video of somebody doing it manually, this will be the video of choice for you. So let's get started. So once you have actually removed the motherboard from the AV Famicom console shell, there's several things you're going to need to desolder and remove. First of all is the DC plug jack, which is actually hooked into this plastic plate. So unscrew it and desolder it and remove it. You also want to remove P3, which is the AV multi-out port, and desolder all the pins and remove that. You want to remove U7, which is the 7805 voltage regulator. Remove C14, C13, C5, Q1, C15, the PPU, which is this whole chip here, C2, C1, C3, R4, R3, R14, and C4. And I've listed all of that here. Also, you'll want to lift pin 17 of U3. That's this chip here, and that's pin 17 right there. And you also want to bridge pin 15 and 16 together of the same chip, and I'll show you what that looks like on the underside of the motherboard here. So next image. And here you can see I bridged 15 and 16 together, and I've completely removed pin 17. All right, next step. Here I've begun to install the new caps. I use Nichicon. That's my favorite brand to use. They're high quality caps. So C4 has been reinstalled, as well as these two caps here. And also I put a new 7805 voltage regulator. You can't see it because it's now bolted to the heat sink. And down here you see I installed a new cap on C15. Don't do that. This is the reset function cap, so you want to leave this unpopulated. And then I've also installed the dual wipe socket that comes with the NESRGB kit. All right, next image. And here I've labeled and designated the wire tap points that are going to be connected to the NSRGB board for expansion audio and other things like the CPU1 and CPU2 lines. The P145 is the actual expansion audio line that we're going to hook up to the NSRGB board. I've also designated ground, but it's not necessary to use. I thought I was going to need it for a shielded wire, but the lines are so short, they literally run right down here and up above to the NSRGB board. Once that's installed, it's such a short run of lines that you really don't need this ground line. So disregard that unless you're absolutely obsessive about it. But my own noise floor tests have shown it's not necessary. All right, next image. And you can see here I've taken 28 AUG rainbow ribbon wire and stripped it with the lines sort of reaching each via hole, and so that they all nice and neatly angle out this way without any kinks or bends. Leave yourself several inches of slack so that you can trim short and solder to the NSRGB board once that's installed here. All right, next step. All right, now this is the audio amp section of the NSRGB board. All these parts highlighted in red you're going to remove. And also you're going to need to purchase some parts, some 0603 SMD parts. They're going to be a 15 kilo ohm resistor, a 20 kilo ohm resistor, a 100 kilo ohm resistor, and an X7R ceramic 1 UF capacitor. That's a 1 microfarad capacitor. All right, next image. Here I have wicked off the parts that have been removed. I wicked off the pads using solder wick. That's just my OCD. I want it to look nice and neat. Next image. And here I have bridged these 2 pads and these 4 pads. This is again part of ACE's audio balance restoration and all of that. So I use board-to-board posts that I clipped short and just simply soldered to the pads to bridge them. You can, of course, use leg bits from capacitors that you've clipped off. Next image. And here, highlighted in purple, are the new parts that I mentioned prior. Here is the 20 kilo ohm resistor. This is the 1UF ceramic X7R capacitor. It's a 15 kilo ohm resistor and the 100 kilo ohm resistor. All right, next image. And here's a zoom out of the entire board, just to show that we need to jump J5 over here and jump J3 over here. And you see here, I started to prep this for an external palette swapping toggle switch. So do not bridge these 2 pads. Leave them like these 2 pads are, just isolated. All right, next image. I've begun to install here on the NSRGB board the board-to-board posts for the adapter that comes with the kit. You see here are shown flush cutters because before I soldered these pins, I flush cut these flat. I did not do that to this side, just this side. And then I filled in the vias with solder to make sure they were nice and solidly connected. The reason I wanted to do this is so that I can now install the PPU directly to the board without including another dual wipe socket. And you'll see what that looks like in the next image. And it's now installed nice and neat and flat to the board, and I'll show you the side view of how that looks. Here's the side view. You can see because I flush cut the pins here, they don't come into contact with the PPU, allowing it to be installed nice and flat. Here's how far up those pins would have stuck if I had just simply soldered them without flush cutting them. Give you an idea what that looks like from the side view. All right, next image. And here are the board-to-board posts from the underside of the NSRGB board. These here are the ones that I flush cut on the top side, and these pins are the PPU that have been soldered in place. Next image. And here the adapter board has been soldered to those board-to-board posts, and then the dual wipe pins have been installed to this board. And this completes the NESRGB kit for now, so we're just going to set this aside. This is now done and fully prepped. Next image. Okay, so back to the motherboard. This is the AV multi-out section that has already been removed, designated by P3. And the reason we've done this is we want access to these 2 ground pins. You see this sort of, tan colored stripe, brown stripe here. That connects these 2 pins to the ground plane. But the problem is this ground plane has CPU syncing right into it, causing transient noise, which makes, for bad AV quality. You get AV quality issues. So what we're going to do is take a drill, small drill bit, and drill out these vias, not all the way through, just enough to disconnect them from the ground plane. So let's take a look at and see what that looks like. Here you see I've drilled them out just enough to separate them from the ground plane, each one, and they're also separated from each other, but again, not all the way through, just enough to separate them from the ground plane. And in the next image, went ahead and did that on the underside as well. This may not be necessary, but I figured, better to be safe than sorry. I went ahead and separated them from each other. They were only connected here. This is left over, but don't worry, it's not actually connecting the 2 vias. And how I know that is in the next image. You can see I'm testing continuity after reinstalling the P3 AV multi-out port. Here's the two plastic tabs, and I soldered all the pins except for those two ground pins. And this is me testing continuity with the ground plane. That's this entire ground plane. There should be no continuity between the pins or the ground plane. So no beeps between each other and no beeps between the ground plane and the pins. All right, next image. And here I've reinstalled the DC plug. That's here and here. And then the two screws for the plastic plate here. Very simple. And of course, a better view of the pins that have been soldered back onto the motherboard for the AV multi-out. Notice the two ground pins are still left completely floating. All right, next image. And here is Voltar's quick solder board. I highly recommend getting this. It makes it so much easier than doing your own wire work to the pins. Just use an FFC cable here. I've already opened the gate for it and prepped and bolted it in place. Once again, highly recommend getting this kit. All right, next image. And here I've restored light gun zapper support to controller port 2. You cannot do it to port 1, so just port 2. And this is, once again, 28 AUG rainbow ribbon wire cut to fit and soldered. You want to leave enough slack so that you can scoot this part over because there's a base plate that goes over here and you don't want it pinching these two lines. I made it just enough room to make it in there. All right, next image. All right, and once again, you can see there's that old prep work. Trust me, I went ahead and removed this and desoldered it off the board, and I also removed C15. But now the NESRGB board is installed into place on that dual wipe socket on the motherboard. And then Voltar's quick solder board, I have soldered in place here, here, and then here, all the way through here. And remember those lines, the CPU 1 and CPU 2 and the P145 lines have now been soldered into place. Note this set of jumper pads here, do not solder them together, leave them isolated. I made that mistake of soldering them together and later found out, no, had to wick them off. Do not solder those together. All right, next image. And here I've finally removed C15 and relocated it to the in-game reset board, which was designed by Bordy and manufactured by Voltar. This is an older revision where you just simply move the electrolytic capacitor to the board. However, Voltar has made a revision where there's a ceramic capacitor that does the job of this electrolytic, so you don't even need it here nor here. So on that revision, you won't even need this capacitor. On Tim Worthington's latest revision 4.0 NSRGB board, this is all integrated into the board, so you don't even need this board at all. It's all integrated into the NSRGB board on 4.0. But this is a version 2.x board, so I did need this kit. All right, next image. Here I've hooked up power, 3.3 volts to the right side of this ceramic capacitor and 5 volts to the left side of this ceramic capacitor. And I went ahead and installed a resistor and LED, a blue LED for power indication, purely for troubleshooting purposes. You could, of course, add wires to this LED and hook it to the top shell power button so that, you know, if you wanted, you could see it light up when you turn it on. I don't believe in doing that, so I just leave it here for troubleshooting purposes. All right, next image. We're almost done here, by the way. All right, now for our tricky part, I've included inches and millimeters/centimeters here to show you roughly how long these cuts need to be. These have been stripped and tinned, of course. Gives you an idea of how much. Leave several inches of slack on the other side of these 4 rainbow, again, 28 AUG rainbow ribbon wire lines. All right, next image. You can see here why it was so important to strip those lines to that specifications as they neatly reach each of the posts they need to. These are the pins for controller port 1, which allow you to use your controller to change the palette and reset the console with the controller. And these 2 lines here are for the in-game reset. But if I zoom in, you can see I have cut the trace here, scraped it away, and then checked with a multimeter these two posts to make sure there is no continuity, no beeps between these two posts by cutting this trace. All right, next image. And on the the top side of the motherboard, I have now taken those same 4 lines and neatly peeled and soldered them into place. Remember the color coding I used here and compare with the previous image so that you know which line goes to which pad on the in-game reset board. All right, next image. And then finally, I installed the FFC cable neatly this way. I believe this to be a superior method than trying to tuck it in and crease it here. You could damage the FFC cable doing that by creasing and folding it. I have done test recordings. There's no problem laying it out this way. There's no transient noise issues. The noise floor sounded perfectly fine. So I recommend doing it loosely this way. It's much easier. And this actually completes the complete Ultimate AV Famicom mod setup. If we go back to the original image, I went ahead and tested with Akama Joe Densets here for VRC6 expansion audio using HD Retrovision cables. I love these cables because they have RCA jacks for hooking into like an amp if you wanted to. In my case, I hooked them into my PC for direct recording testing, and it sounded beautiful. And in the description link below this video, you will find a link to my other video showing an audio demonstration of just how wonderful this particular AV Famicom sounds. Also, there is a link to the NSRGB page for ACE's audio balance restoration, as well as a couple of other links. And thank you so much for watching this short, concise video, as it could be anyway, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks.